Morning. It's good to see everybody here this morning. I love seeing those kids up here. That was great. I'm going to start, I announced this last week, but when I get back from my vacation, we will start into the Gospel of John. But I wanted to spend a couple weeks in Matthew chapter 10 specifically, to remind us. I think we always need a few reminders of what our mission is. What are we called to do? And so this morning I want to sort of finish that off and sort of leave us with something to think about. And again, last week we asked several questions about what can we do as a church to have an impact on our community? What is God calling the Simi Church of Christ to do here? And I really want us to spend serious time praying and thinking about that, and then coming up with ideas. I want to hear from you what you think God is calling us to do. And that doesn't come easily. That comes with a lot of prayer and a lot of given thought and meditation to it. So let's continue to spark our thinking as we continue in Matthew chapter 10. So do not be afraid of them. There is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. What I tell you in the dark, speak in the daylight. What is whispered in your ear, proclaim from the roofs. Do not be afraid of those who can kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from the will of your Father. And even the very hairs of your head are numbered. Although in some of our cases that's getting a lot easier. So don't be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows. Whoever acknowledges me before men, I will acknowledge him before my Father in heaven. But whoever disowns me before men, I will disown him before my Father in heaven. Do not suppose that I've come to bring peace to the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be members of his own household. Anyone who loves his father and mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves his son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And anyone who does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. He who receives you receives me, and he who receives me receives the one who sent me. Anyone who receives a prophet because he is a prophet will receive a prophet's reward. And anyone who receives a righteous man because he is a righteous man will receive a righteous man's reward. And anyone who gives a cup of cold water to one of the least of these little ones, because he is my disciple, I will tell you the truth. He will certainly not lose his reward. It's a very unusual passage. Probably not one of Jesus' more popular speeches to his disciples. But he's giving some very, very clear long-term instructions. Jesus is starting to let his disciples know things may not always be easy. In fact, I can pretty much tell you they're not going to be. And that you're going to have to really reach deep down and find out what you truly believe, what's really in your heart. As one preacher put it, he said, we're all like cups of coffee. Or you might see a cup and you might see some steam coming out of it, and you might think, well, that's coffee, but it could be lots of things. And you won't know until someone bumps the cup and something spills out of what's truly inside of it. And often that's the way it is with Christians until we get bumped, until we get knocked around a little, until someone slaps us, what's inside is not revealed until that time. And so we have to be careful that what's really inside, what do we really believe? What's at the core of our faith when we face life's difficulties? He starts out with this, do not be afraid. And he says it 3 times in the first 5 verses. Why do you think Jesus was emphasizing this so much? Do not be afraid, do not be afraid, do not be afraid. If you read through the Old Testament, that was one of those my little hobbies. As I'm reading through the Bible this time, every time I find the phrase, do not be afraid, I'm underlining it. It appears often. Why do you suppose God and Jesus spend so much time telling us to not be afraid? Because we're scared to death. Oh no, a lot of people say, well, I'm not afraid of anything. I just have some little insecurities. That's called fear. That we all have these little things that we're afraid of. And some people take it to an extreme, and some people don't. Some people, there's all sorts of, I love the fact that we've got all these fancy names for all of our phobias. And there's all sorts of, some people are afraid to get out of bed. I mean, I can't even imagine. My back hurts. I have to get up and do something. I got to get out of bed. And some people are afraid of water, and some people are afraid of heights, and some people are afraid of spiders, and all that. And some people are just afraid of everything. People. Some people just assume everyone's out to get them. And I love the fact that, that little saying, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean that everyone isn't out to get you. Well, there's something to go to sleep on, We are a fearful people. And unless we actually anchor ourselves in God, unless we anchor ourselves in following Jesus, unless we have a specific cause that we're dedicated to, we're just going to walk around afraid all the time. For those of you who saw that movie or the TV series Band of Brothers about the 101st Airborne going through World War II, there was a one particular episode that focused on a guy that was just scared to death. And he finally admitted to one of the sergeants, he said, I've been here a week, I've been in the middle of all sorts of fighting, I've never fired my gun once. He just, every time the firefight would start, he'd just get down in his foxhole and sit there and shake. And the guy told him, he said, you know what your problem is? You're afraid you're going to die. And what you need to understand is, you are going to die. You're not going to live through this. So get over that and focus on your job. I thought, wow. I mean, that's really good Christian advice. And for a lot of people, that's another one of those fears. They're afraid you're going to die. And you know what? You are going to die. That shouldn't come as a shock to anybody. You can't get out of this life alive, okay? It doesn't work. So quit worrying about that and focus on the mission. What has God called us to do? Do not be afraid of those who can kill the body but cannot kill the soul. That's simple terms. Yeah, and he's letting his apostles know, his disciples, there's people out there that can kill the body. And that would bother a lot of people. They're going to get into situations where they can and, in fact, eventually will be killed. As far as we know, John the apostle is the only one who died of old age. That all the other disciples were somehow killed for their faith. And so he's telling them, don't be afraid of the ones who can kill the body, but not the soul. And then there's one, be afraid. And the Bible is filled with all sorts of do not be afraid. But there's one very consistent fear. Be afraid. Be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. In other words, this life isn't all there is to it. There is more to the story. And that we need to have that in our heads as we move through this life, as we live through this life, as we look to accomplish the mission that God has given us. We need to recognize just because someone kills us doesn't mean it's over. There's a bigger picture. And that we need to have faith in that bigger picture in order to live in this picture. We live now based on a future reality, not on a future hope, not on a future wish, not on a future, boy, I sure think that might work out, but on a future knowledge, a future reality that we can count on. See, perspective is everything. Perspective is everything. I remember, Pilate told Jesus, don't you know I have the authority? You don't have any authority except that which God gives you. And of course, he knew. There's a much bigger picture going on here. There's something going on here you don't even understand. And we need to live with that future reality in our hearts. God's in charge. He knows all that is taking place in your life, in our lives. And I think during, I know a lot of people are a little nervous about our political situation right now. And we need to memorize this. God's in charge. God knows what's going on. He will get us through. It doesn't matter who gets elected and who doesn't. We can still be Christians in that situation, and we are called to be Christians in that situation. To glorify God, no matter what happens. God will handle anyone or anything that opposes us in a much better way than we will. So focus on the mission. This is such an important thing. We were talking about this in class Sunday this morning. When Saul was trying to kill David, David had an opportunity to kill him and didn't. Saul comes into a cave. David crawls up behind him. His men are all saying, God, look, God has handed him to you on a platter. Just go kill him. You're going to be the next king. It's all over. This is from the Lord. Kill him. And David says, no, I'm going to let God take care of that. If God has promised me to be king, I'm going to let God take Saul out when he's ready, not when I try to make it happen. But he recognized God will take care of Saul in a much better way than I ever will. And Saul will deal with each one of your enemies and my enemies in a much better way than we will. We need to focus on the mission. Praise God through all situations. Whoever acknowledges me before men, I will also acknowledge him before my Father in heaven. You think, well, that's great. Then he has the next line. But whoever disowns me before men, I will disown him before my Father in heaven. What does that tell us? It's one of those statements that it's really easy to understand and therefore it's somewhat terrifying. That if we disown Jesus, if we ever just, and you know how it is, I doubt if anybody would just step up and say, I don't believe in Jesus. I think we're all believers here. But how easy is it to deny Jesus simply by not speaking up? Being in a situation that is clearly ungodly, unethical, immoral, and simply by our silence, we deny our faith in Jesus Christ. And that we need to take this verse seriously because it's not hard to understand. It's really pretty simple. Our mission is being monitored. You always get those calls, you make those phone calls that irritate everybody about, this call is being monitored for quality assurance. You think, I don't care, I just want to get this fixed. I don't care who's listening, But the fact is, every time you're in a situation where God is calling us to step forward, God's placed us there to say the right word, to be the right blessing, to offer the right rebuke, whatever it is, God puts us in those situations every day, and we need to hear that little recording. Just, you get there and you think, well, maybe I don't know, maybe I'll just be quiet. And you need to hear, your encounter is being monitored for quality assurance. Our dealings with the world around us during the week is being monitored. And you think, well, there's nobody else from church around. Or one of my favorites is after I preach a sermon, someone will come up and say, do you have cameras and microphones in my house? And I always say, no, but God does. We're being monitored for quality control. And that's what this verse says. If you acknowledge me before men, I will be glad to acknowledge you before my Father. But if you disown me before men, I will disown you. Jesus will speak up for us to God, his Father, in the same manner that we speak up for him here. It's not hard. It's not difficult theology. It's pretty easy to understand. The only way we gain access to the Father is to acknowledge his Son to the people God places in our spheres of influence. He's not even saying you got to go off to some foreign country. That's great if that's what God's called you to do, but the fact of the matter is on a daily basis, God puts people in our lives that we're supposed to influence, that we're supposed to speak up for God, and we're being monitored for quality assurance. Then we get to this really difficult passage where he says, I did not come to bring peace but a sword. That sounds so wrong. Jesus is the Prince of Peace. He's supposed to, you're supposed to trust God and he'll take care of you. And you read a verse like this, it just doesn't sound right. And we've got to understand he's following a rabbinic practice. This was standard Jewish rabbi practice, was to state the consequences as an intention. That Jesus is saying, this is what's going to happen. And he's saying, I didn't come to bring peace. I've come to set people against each other. Well, that sounds wrong, and the fact of the matter is, that's not what he wants. But that is going to be the consequence of the action. All through history, when people stand up for God, they have to stand up for God because there's people standing up against him. That there are people pulling away, which is why God calls people to pull forward. That there's always a tension. And sometimes the tension is even among God's people. You read through the Old Testament, you find, Israel, God's people, fighting against each other. Right from the beginning. Moses, brings them out of Egypt, and you have Korah's rebellion, where, why did God put you in charge? Why didn't he put me in charge? That there's oftentimes the tension, the people we're called to stand up for and glorify God are often brothers and sisters who need to see a better way. He's called the Prince of Peace. The good news about Jesus Christ is going to cause some tension. When we try to draw closer to God, it's going to cause some tension. For those who believe, they find peace. And the peace that Jesus is talking about is peace in the face of chaos. Not peace as in you'll have no problems. I always hate that when I hear Christians say, you just follow Jesus and all your problems go away. And I think, wow, you must follow a different Jesus than I do. Because what I've discovered is when you follow Jesus, he presents you with all sorts of problems so that you can behave in a Christ-like manner in the face of those issues, that you can find peace in the face of the chaos, peace in the face of the tension. We tend to only grow when we're challenged. And that's sad, but that's the way it is. I have found that if I lay on my bed and think really hard about exercising, I don't get any stronger. I don't lose any weight. I actually have to break down and go to the gym and sweat a lot in order to attain those goals. It takes action. We have to be challenged. And it always hurts. Allison keeps telling me, sooner or later you're going to get to where you just really love it. It hasn't happened yet. I think she's lying. She normally tells the truth. But it hurts every time. But I'm starting to feel better in general. I've lost a little weight. I'm getting a little stronger. But it only happens when we're challenged. It doesn't happen laying at home thinking about it. I always loved that poster. It said, when I feel like exercising, I lay down until the feeling goes away. That just. For those who do not want to follow God, they will find a strong desire to destroy those who do. To destroy the people that are making them feel guilty about their worldliness. And I see this in churches. I mentioned it before that, someone gets on fire. A new Christian comes in, and they get really pumped, or someone's been a Christian a long time and finally, reaches a new illumination, and they come to church and they're all excited. They want to get with it. We need to get out and save the world. We need to start sharing our faith. And everyone around them says, chill out. Let's calm. This is a marathon. Let's take it easy. Let's not get so excited. Because you're making the rest of us look bad. They don't say that. But again, often the opposition to a new spirit of God are the people within, not the people without. And that we need to be open to the Spirit at any given time. And when some new young Christian starts making the rest of us look bad, quit trying to get them to calm down, and why don't we just calm up a little, you know? Anyone who loves his father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves his son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And anyone who does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. This gets even tougher. This gets a little more scary. I mean, father and mother, daughter and son, these are kind of the strongest relationships we can have. Talk about the ties that bind, the things that are unbreakable. These relationships between your parents and your children there's a connection there that's just real. You die for these people. I always remember that story of the lady whose daughter was stuck under the car, and she literally lifted the whole car off of her daughter. She broke her back in the process, but she didn't care. It's her daughter. These are the bonds. These are the heavy relationships. And Jesus is saying, now, if you love them more than me, you're not worthy of me. You think, well, but I know these people. I see these people on a daily basis. How am I supposed to do that? What's this all about? Why would, I can say, you need to love me to be worthy of me. That's no problem. We're all good there. But you've got to love me more than father and mother, more than son or daughter. And how does that work? This, again, is another one of those rabbinic, the rabbis would do this. This is how they would state priorities, how you clarify priorities. That those relationships are very important. Jesus is not suggesting for a minute that we don't love those people and that we don't love them a lot. But he's just trying to keep perspective here and priorities. That when we give our lives to Jesus, we give everything to Jesus, including our relationships. Keith Green has has a song that talks about this, where he says, I pledge my life to Jesus for the gospel. You think, well, that's great. But then he goes on to say, I pledge my wife to Jesus for the gospel. And then the third verse says, I pledge my son to Jesus for the gospel. Because when we give our lives to Jesus, we give it all. What we're saying is, I will sacrifice my life and the life of my family for the sake of the glory of God. This is heavy stuff. Serious stuff. All of our relationships are pointing us to God. Our relationships will tell us about who God is and what God is, but the fact of the matter is, he is the reason for our very existence. And as a show of respect, appreciation, whatever you want to call it, our relationship with Jesus has to be the number one priority. And if it is, all of those other relationships improve, generally speaking. But if we don't get that right, typically nothing else goes very right at all. And then he says this, and I've always thought this was interesting, because it says, you got to take up your cross and follow me. Jesus hadn't gone to the cross yet. His disciples weren't even aware or didn't seem to understand that he was going to the cross. And so when he said this to them, what did it mean to them then? We have a whole 2,000 years of a theology of the cross, but what about his disciples? When Jesus throws this out, if you won't take up your cross and follow me, you're not worthy of me, what were they thinking? Well, they lived in the Roman world, and the Romans made a habit out of crucifying everybody and anyone who wasn't Roman as a way of scaring the local population. And it was pretty effective. You put somebody up on a cross, it usually takes them 4 days to a week to die. And it left a strong impression, and they usually made you carry the crossbeam out to where you were going to be crucified. And so when Jesus said this, they at least understood what he's saying is we need to be ready to be marked for death. When we are baptized into the name of Jesus Christ, when we commit our lives to following Jesus, we are literally saying, I am with you all the way to death. He's saying, take up your cross, which means I am willing to die for the gospel. I love whose side are you living on, whose side are you dying on? I'm dying on the Lord's side. When we get baptized into Jesus, we're saying, I am dying. Whenever that time comes, long term, short term, I'll be on the Lord's side. That takes priority over everything else. And then we have this truly strange phrase, whoever finds his life will lose it. And whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. That just doesn't make any sense from a human standpoint. Whoever finds his life, if you find your life, you've got it, right? And he says, if you find it, you lost it. Now, if you lose it, you found it. Well, I've never lost something and then found it. And rarely do I find something I'm looking for and then it's gone. That's usually, I've been looking for it, I got it, I hang on to it tight. And he's making a very strong point, something we've got to understand, the great Christian paradox, as I call it. Because it's very consistent all through the scriptures. If we are self-seeking, it will be self-destructive. If we indulge our appetites, they will overwhelm us. If we indulge our own personal wills, our own personal desires, it will kill us. And the world is filled with visual illustrations of people doing exactly that. But if we seek the interest of others, then we actually become the people God created us to be. Starting with God, and then those around us. Two greatest commandments, love God, love your neighbor. But that's what the Bible keeps telling us. If all you do is go around looking, if it's all about me, I'm going to be a very unhappy person. You ever really think about that? I mean, it's actually, this isn't really too tough. If I'm only interested in getting what I want, I don't know of too many people that get what they want all the time. And if they're all about getting what I want, I'm going to be disappointed often. And I'm going to walk around disappointed. If I get upset when I don't get what I want, if I throw a fit, that's what cracks me up is, kids are, we always talk about, look, you're acting like a child. You're throwing a fit because you're not getting what you want. And you think, well, these children are honest about it. I mean, they don't even try to put on the pretense, They don't get what they want, they start crying. And everyone gets that. But boy, it's irritating when you see adults throwing fits and you're just upset because you didn't. No, I'm not. We try to act like we're mature, but we're not. We throw fits when we don't get what we want, just like children. And then we try to act like it's, we're justified or, it's righteous indignation. It's not about us. It's all about God. And I know I keep having you repeat it, and I'm sure some of you are getting sick of it, and if you're getting sick of it, you're going to have to fire me because I'm just going to keep saying it. It's so important that we get this, that we just don't say it because that's what the preacher wants, but that we understand. It's not about us. It's all about God. It's all about God. We need to get that. And once we get that, we've got it all. And until we get that, we've got nothing. We're all a part of the mission. I really like this passage because this is just great. He who receives me, he receives the one who sent me. Anyone who receives a prophet's reward because he is a prophet will receive a prophet's reward. Anyone who receives a prophet. And anyone who receives a righteous man because he is a righteous man will receive a righteous man's reward. What he's saying is, not everyone's the preacher. Not everyone's the elder. Not everyone's the missionary. Not everyone is this or that. We all have a part. And we all play our part. That we are the body of Christ. And which part of the body is not the issue. When I achieve something, the whole body benefits. When I go to the gym, I don't say, I don't think my little toe is pulling its weight. So, you can just stay fat. The whole body. No matter what, you're all part of the body. If you're doing what the body is doing, you benefit from the body. And if you don't, the whole body suffers. But here he's telling them, look, if maybe you're not the missionary, maybe you're not the prophet, maybe you're not the righteous person, but you just welcome into your home while they're teaching a meeting, you receive the same reward that they do. I think that's pretty awesome. That as long as we're all doing what God's called us to do, we get the same reward as everybody else, which ultimately is getting to sit in the presence of God and praise his name for eternity. But in the process, while we're down here, we are speaking for Jesus. We are representing Jesus. Paul uses that language. We are his ambassadors. We represent God on earth, and we need to always remember that. And we actually bring heaven down. And I know some people say, well, that sounds terrible to bring heaven down. No. That's what, you see, in the Lord's Prayer, Jesus said, on earth as it is in heaven. I think it's really awesome that we're going to get to spend eternity with God after we die. But the whole point is that we have something to do here before we get there. And then we're not here just to sort of wait around until Jesus gets around to coming back. That we actually have a job to do here because of the fact that he's coming. That we're here to make on earth as it is in heaven, to bring heaven into a very dark and worldly place. All the parts of the body work together to bring about God's plan and will be rewarded accordingly. You don't have to sit around and say, boy, I wish I could do their job or do that job. And I say that because I do this all the time. Every year, the Pepperdine Lectureship is this incredible gift of encouragement and inspiration, and at the same time, it's incredibly humbling. Because I see all these really awesome speakers. And I think, man, I wish I could speak. Oh, I wish I thought of that illustration. Man, I wish I could say it the way they said it. I knew that. I just never said it the way they did. And the fact of the matter is, I'm called to be Daniel, not anybody else. And you're called to be you. And you don't try to do what I do, and I'm not going to try to do what you do. That's what God's called you to do. And as long as we're all doing our job, as part of the body, we will be rewarded accordingly. I end with this passage because I think it ties in right here. Jesus says this a little earlier in Matthew chapter 7. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons and perform many miracles? Then I will say to them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. And that sounds rather strange. But it really gets to the heart of the matter. For the legalists out there, we went through Galatians, we talked a lot about legalism and traditionalism. For the legalists out there, it's not about doing good things. Legalist walks around with his checklist. I've got this, got our 5 acts of worship. Oh man, Ron messed up the schedule today, so, maybe we were not, I don't know. And then, we have our checklist to make sure we get it all right. And Jesus is clearly saying here, doing a lot of right things isn't what it's all about. Are you doing the will of God? Now, for the cheap grace folks out there, it's not about being pretty good and going to church fairly often. It's about doing the will of the Father. You see, this is that higher ground that Paul is called, the higher road that Paul was calling us to. It's not about just doing good things. It's not about just being a good person. Number one, we're not. Number two, it's about doing the will of the Father. That's what we will be judged on. Not our checklist, not our perfect attendance on Sunday. Are we doing God's will in our life? And of course, that sort of implies that we would actually know what that is. And you're not going to know what that is unless you spend time in God's Word and in prayer and talking with God on a long-term basis. You actually have to get to know someone. We have to get to know God really well to know what His will is. It's vital that we understand what the mission is. Jesus said, "Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you." There's no question about the mission. We've got to know our part in it. It's vital that all of us understand our individual parts in the mission, and it's vital that we all understand our corporate part in the mission. What's God calling you and me to do as individuals, and what's God calling us as a body, the Simi Church of Christ, to do in this place. It's not about doing good things instead of bad things. And I say that, and some of you think, well, duh, we know that. There's a lot of Christians that don't know this. I talk to a lot of people that don't get this. That they sort of evaluate their own Christian faith based on, I think I did more good things than bad things, so I'm good. And boy, that's just not what it's all about. It's not just about having a great worship every Sunday. And I've known Christians who think that too. Boy, as long as you get that great worship in on Sunday morning, then we're good the rest of the week. And I'm all for having a great worship. Man, I love to sing and praise God. But that's not what it's all about. It's about knowing and doing the will of God in our lives. It's about knowing and doing the will of God. The alternative is I never knew you. Away from me, evildoers. A little harsh. It's actually pretty simple. And I would prefer knowing and doing the will of God. So I want all of us this week and throughout the rest of our lives to truly pray. Spend some time praying, seeking God's will. And I want to hear about it. I was thrilled last week. I actually got an email. I walked in Tuesday, and there was an email saying, I've been thinking about your sermon, and here's some things I think we could do to help, expand our... And I was just pumped. I thought, wow, they're listening. So I got out of that email and looked for all the other emails. I want us all to pray about this. Not just the elders, not just the preachers, not just the deacons. I want us, as the Simi Church of Christ, to put some serious thought, prayer, meditation about what is God calling us to do here in Simi Valley. And I want to hear about it. I want us to start a conversation that won't end. That we will always be seeking and striving to know God's will and to do it individually and corporately. So please, spend some time thinking and praying about this. And I know I've got a vacation coming up, and I'm going to spend some time thinking and praying about this so that when we come back together, we can start focusing on the mission so that we can please our Father in heaven. If you have any needs this morning, please come as we stand and sing.